In this video, we would see what are the different types of repositories in Jfrog Artifactory Repository Manager, and also we would see how to create and configure Maven repositories in Artifactory. Let us start. In the diagram, we can see the internal network within the organization. Here we have a client machine where the actual builds will happen, and this block indicates a binary repository manager, and this block indicates the external repository or the public repository in internet. For example, if you don't have Artifactory in the organization, so whenever the builds happen in the client machines, the build needs third-party libraries or external artifacts. So then those will be downloaded directly from the public or external repositories from the internet. The client machine can be a desktop or a virtual machine or a container or a continuous integration server. So to avoid downloading the artifacts directly from the internet, we can set up Artifactory as a repository manager within the internal network of the organization. So now in the Artifactory, we have three types of repositories: remote repository, local repository, and virtual repository. This remote repository will be used to proxy the artifacts from the public or external repositories. And local repository is the repository where we can store the organizational internal artifacts. For example, if we have different clients and each client is producing different artifacts, all those artifacts can be stored in the local repository so that each artifact can be shared with the other clients in the organization. And we have another repository which is called as a virtual repository that will aggregate both the local and remote repositories. That means it contains the artifacts both from local repository and remote repository. For example, if the build which is running in the client machine needs artifacts from the local repository as well as remote repository, then instead of downloading from both the local repository and remote repository, the client can directly configure this virtual repository so that it can download both the artifacts directly from the virtual repository instead of individual repositories. So this is the advantage of virtual repository. So for downloading the artifacts, the clients will use the virtual repository, and for uploading the internal artifacts, they will use the local repository. Now let us see how can we set up this local repository, remote repository, and virtual repository for Maven in Artifactory. Now let us log into the Artifactory using admin user. Once we log in, we have to go to the administrative section. So here we have the repositories. We have to click on it and click on the repositories here. Here we can see there are three types of repositories: local, remote, and virtual. So let us start with creating the local repositories. We have to click on add repositories and select local repository. So here we have to select Maven. Now we have to enter the repository key. In Maven we can store two types of artifacts: snapshots and releases. So here I will create two local repositories, one for snapshots and another for releases. So I will provide the repository key as my Maven local snapshots. This repository will be used for storing the snapshot artifacts. I'll keep this environment as default. Since this repository is only for snapshots, so let me uncheck this handle releases and create local repository. So now we can see the local snapshot repository for Maven. Similarly, let me create another local repository for storing the release artifacts. For this, I will unselect this snapshots because we only store releases here. So we can click on create local repository. So now we have another repository which is Maven local releases. Now let us create a remote repository which will point to the external or public repository which is present in the internet. So for that, let us click on add repositories and select remote repository. Select Maven, provide the repository key. So generally we use remote repositories only for storing the stable releases. So that is why I'm not giving snapshots here. But if at all, if you want to use any snapshots, you can also point to that remote repository which has snapshots. So this is the default Maven public repository URL. And here I am unselecting snapshots because I only download the stable releases from internet. Let us create remote repository now. Now a new remote repository is created. So now let us create virtual repositories. So I will create two virtual repositories here. In one virtual repository, we will aggregate the local snapshots and the remote repository. And in the second virtual repository, we will aggregate the local releases and the remote repository. Let me select add repositories, select virtual repository, select Maven. So provide the key. So this is for snapshots. So here we need to select what repositories will be including in the virtual repository. So here I am selecting the snapshots as well as the remote repository. Click on create virtual repository. So let me also create another virtual repository. So this will aggregate the local releases as well as the remote repository. For this, you need to select the local releases repository as well as the remote repository and click on create virtual repository. So now we have another virtual repository. So here we have created 5 repositories, 2 local repositories for Maven snapshots and releases, and 1 remote repository and 2 virtual repositories. So in this video, we have seen what are the Artifactory repositories, and we also have seen how we can create local, remote and virtual repositories for Maven in Artifactory. I hope this video is helpful. If you like the video, please like, share and subscribe. Thanks a lot for watching.